Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Vince Cerf. I'm your Chief Internet Evangelist, and that wasn't the title I asked for. I wanted Archduke, but it didn't work out. We're here to talk about Operation Smile, and you don't want to hear that from me. You want to hear that from the guys who actually make it happen. And so I want to introduce Ruben Ayala to give you an idea of what this is all about. And I've stolen his bio here. And and it comes from Google, right? So that means it must be correct. And I don't want to read the whole thing because he's going to tell us a little bit about how he got involved in this in the first place. That's a story all by itself. But he's a physician and he's a public health specialist from Panama. But he spent 25 years with Operation Smile, which tells you something about how dedicated he has been to the project. And by the time he's done with his talk today, I think you'll understand why. He actually got involved when he was still an undergraduate, if I remember correctly. He was a translator for the program. He's from Panama. So he was helping the people who didn't happen to speak Spanish, presumably, to execute on their project. He's got all kinds of experience with lots of organizations dealing with healthcare all around the world. And I don't want to spend too much time, frankly, Ruben, on your biography, because what's important is not what you've done, but what you're doing. And that's what I want people to hear about. So let's get Ruben up here to tell us the story of Operation Smile and his involvement in it. So Ruben, the stage is yours.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's really great to be here with you today. And we appreciate the time that you've taken to actually come join us, and to those of you who are connected as well, hopefully you'll enjoy this story of hope and transformation. And speaking with Vince before coming to join you, he talked about the desire that you all have as an organization to share knowledge, allow people to learn, allow people to collaborate, and the ability to get that knowledge to actually create solutions to complex, very, very complex problems. And if we actually do that every day, if we actually do solve problems that actually can help the lives of people, then we have something, right? So my colleague and friend Chris Bryan and I are here to talk about Operation Smile. And as you've seen in the video and the picture, we take care of children who are born with a facial deformity called cleft lip and cleft palate. And these kids, are coming to the world in many different countries. You actually have the ability to take care of them. In so many other countries, the treatment that they so require is not necessarily readily available, but we can solve that problem. So Operation Smile started back in 1982 in the Philippines, and Dr. McGee and his wife, Kathy McGee, went to the Philippines, and as they drove around the poor areas, they realized the amount of need. But they very quickly went into a very nice hotel, and they started driving through the countryside and saw the beautiful landscapes and the beautiful children, but nothing could have ever prepared them to see what they saw in the small town of Naga City, where they were supposed to operate on about 50 children who were born with cleft lips and palates. 300 of them came, and their families. So as they made their way through the masses of people, they could sense the anxiety, the despair. And they did take care of those 50 children at that time, but there were no plans of going back. A woman came to Dr. McGee and his wife and said, I have this basket of bananas that I'd like to give you to say thank you for trying. Thank you for trying. Her kid had not received surgery, but just the fact that someone had actually tried was meaningful enough for her to probably give one of the few things she had. The director of the hospital at that time said, if you ever get a chance to come back, please come back, because these kids will still be here. They might be 5 or 10 years older, but they'll still be here. So they went back to the United States to live, came back to live their lives as usual, but they couldn't stop thinking about these kids. So they gathered a whole bunch of friends and went back and time again, and that's how Operation Smile started. And as they say in life, there are no ordinary moments. This was an extraordinary moment that set in motion a chain, a sequence of events that has allowed many people like you to actually be engaged in this transformation. He was talking about the fact that I was born in Panama, and up to the age of 16, this is what I had seen of Panama. This is a beautiful city, the amazing beaches. If you ever get a chance to visit, please visit. I guarantee you you'll enjoy it. But beyond that, I didn't really know the needs of my own country. So when Operation Smile came in 1992, this is what I saw. Hundreds of people, again, coming to Operation Smile at the hospital. And at that point, I met Bill and Kathy McGee, which was amazing. But I started asking myself, where have these kids been? Why have I never seen one of them? And I started to learn about the people of Panama, the country where I was born, through little Bartolo and his sister. See, Bartolo was about 2 years old, and his sister was about 8 years old, and she had traveled for 5 hours to get to the place where Operation Smile was. She had nothing but a couple of changes, some diapers, a bottle, a little pocket change, and the enormous responsibility of bringing her baby brother back with surgery and hopefully a new lease in life. Think about it, 8 years old. How many 8-year-old children that you know bear that responsibility? So Bartolo was sick, but Operation Smile treated him, and it was by the end of the last day of surgery, he was healthy enough for surgery. And the tears of his little sister as she held him in the recovery room sort of become this emotional symbol of what transformation can be for people like her, for children like her. But they became the conduit for me to start to learn about the needs of people in my country. And on the other side, I saw hundreds of volunteers coming together to actually help them so that they will have a place to sleep, so they have food to eat, so they have transportation. In addition to surgery, they could go back home knowing that they had been truly being cared for. This is the team that actually came to Panama in 1992, and if you see there's a brown dot on their side, that's me at 16, translating and learning. When I go back to Panama, I go back with a great sense of joy, because what I see now is my countrymates doing the work by themselves. You see, that group didn't just come to take care of children. They came to set an example. They came to share the knowledge. They came to use that knowledge to create a change, to take action to solve a problem. And that spread like wildfire in the people of my country, and that's it gives me a great sense of joy and pride. Now, when you see the pictures of children with cleft lips and this gap in the mouth, you might think, well, if you fix the deformity, that's it, right? These kids actually have had to endure bullying, making fun, being made fun of, being ostracized. So we can change that. But it's much more than appearances. It's much more than what you see. These kids actually have a lot of problems eating. So imagine it's not just the opening of the lip, but also the opening of the roof of your mouth. Whenever you go in a swimming pool and you drink water and it goes through the nose, it's very painful because there's this openness in the roof of the mouth. That's what these kids feel every single time they try to feed. So imagine you having a baby and trying to feed this baby and the painful experience that this baby has to go through. So when we fix the deformity, we enable the baby to be nourished properly, to feed properly, to grow properly, and to fight disease properly. Imagine the moment a mom holds her child and and breastfeeds. That moment is restored, and the beauty that goes along with it. In addition to that, because of that openness, there's that hole. Children have a difficult time speaking. So when we actually do surgery on them, and we close that, it's not only about closing the hole, but actually putting the muscles where the muscles are supposed to be. Children are able to speak properly again. And then they're able to go to school, they're able to communicate with their peers. Every 3 minutes, somewhere in the world, a child is being born this way. But we have a solution. We can actually erase this deformity. We can actually take care of these children. There are many diseases in the world that today we don't have a solution for. We can correct this. It just takes the ability to dream and action to actually follow through and create and turn that dream into a reality. So we do believe that no child should have to suffer from lack of access to safe surgery. But it isn't only about children. And as you go through through different towns and countries, you understand the level of need. And back in 1998, much younger back then, I met Rosa Maria. Rosa Maria was a 73-year-old woman. And she had lived her entire life with this deformity. And I couldn't help myself. I had to ask her, Rosa Maria, for 73 years, you have lived this way. What made you finally get surgery? To what she promptly answered, I didn't know I could get care. I had no idea that I could get surgery and this could be fixed. And then she said, my entire life, I have hoped to be like any other woman, to maybe feel pretty for an instance, maybe even wear lipstick. Now, to the females in this room, and so many of us might think, well, lipstick of all things. But think about it for a second. You get up every morning, you do your hair, you do your makeup, and you don't think about it twice. This woman had dreamed about that moment for 73 years. The good news, she got surgery, and by the time she left, all the female volunteers and doctors and nurses had given her all the cosmetics that she had brought, probably likely enough to last her a lifetime. So Operation Smile continues to try to go to every corner of the earth. And we've operated on boats, we've operated on planes, we have operated on classrooms. This is actually a project that we actually had to respond, and we were able to respond to some of the victims in Haiti outside of the clefts. We've operated on tents. We're looking to operate on mobile units and trucks, creating safe environments. But we've also created infrastructure that allows kids to receive the very, very best, no matter where they are. Hospitals and centers that offer nothing but excellence to these kids, because we believe that they all need safe, well-timed, and effective surgery. Now, how many of you have had surgery? And raise your hands. Cool. So the vast majority of you have had surgery. Believe it or not, by the time you're 14, 15, about 2/3 of you would have needed some type of intervention. And if that's the case, but you live in a country where you don't have access, what's the answer to the rest of your future? You might actually have to live with disability or simply die. Billions of people today still are lacking access to safe surgery. And the poorest third of the world actually have a very, very small amount of access to care available. This is a problem we can solve. This is a problem we should solve. And this is where you come in. Because using your gifts is what enables people to actually start making wave and solving complex problems like the ones we discussed. You have the ability to actually take someone from the shadows and give that person the ability to live a normal, happy, fulfilling life. And when you actually make a change in someone's life, it's not that person, it's that family, it's that community, certainly the country. To me, someone like Don Alex, whose story I'll tell you, represents sort of the best in humanity and the people who are impacted by what you might do or what you do, and in turn, take that energy and continue the chain of positive actions. So he's holding his little kid, and this is Don Alex. And as I asked Don Alex, what do you feel when you realize that your child had been born this way? And as he tells me the experience, this is many years after, he starts to cry, and he says, I was hopeless. I was ready to sell my little house and the little car that I had inherited because I knew I had to offer care to my child. He didn't have to. Because of volunteers and members of the Operation Smile team, his baby boy was able to get surgery. But what's remarkable about Don Alex is that he realized that he wasn't the only one who was in that situation. So he started going around his region of Olancho in Honduras, making sure that any child who was born this way will make his or her way to Operation Smile. And these are some of the families that, through him, have been able to make it to Operation Smile Honduras to get care. So every action that is positive and makes a change in the lives of people creates actually an avalanche of really positive things. And because of that is that I tell you today, we need you. It's the reason we need you. Because we can dream bigger. What if, through all the different tools and opportunities that you create with your knowledge, we were able to not only map out how far Olancho is, but where are all the children that he's found, and the children who we need to make sure continue to get care, and the ones who have been born who might not be able to understand how far they had to get to, and how can we make sure that we use that knowledge to offer assistance so they can make it to a place where they can get the care they need. What if we use the tools at our disposal to make sure that not a single mom has to suffer because she doesn't know that her child can actually get care? Today, there are about 7 million people 7 million healthcare workers in the world who are still required to take care of the needs of people. So we have to train more providers. What if we were able to use the tools at our disposal to make sure that the knowledge is readily available so that more people engage, so more people create, so that more people share, so that more people give their talents to actually create this opportunity to give someone a chance, and do so in the most, not only the most more knowledgeable ways, but the humane ways. What if we were able to look at how the supplies and equipment are sourced and shared and put in the right places in a way that's efficient so that not a single operating room where children are being transformed will ever lack any piece of equipment? Now, here's another one. Today, we have the ability to operate on these kids. But if you were to ask me, do we know what the best technique is? I will have to tell you no. And what happens is many surgeons will tell you the best technique to take care of these kids is the technique that the surgeon is most comfortable with. I don't know about you, but that doesn't make me feel very warm and fuzzy. I mean, you don't go and have cardiac surgery and say, you know, I don't know what technique is the best one, but I'll use my own and see how it goes. But because we have the ability to look at the before and the after, what if we were able to use modeling to understand how symmetry ends up happening and match the really good outcomes to the techniques? And now we're not talking about a manual process of dozens of surgeries. We could actually be taking the knowledge of thousands of surgeries. Operation Smile has operated on over 300,000 children. And with that knowledge, we could actually come back to the surgeons, or anybody who wants to learn to actually take care of these kids and says, this is the way to take care of them. This is the one that's going to give them the best result. This is the one that's going to give a chance to kids to actually smile. You may or may not know, but we believe that change starts with the young people. And because we believe that we have to take action for dozens and decades and hundreds of years to come, we have to empower the young people to start a movement or to grow their movement. Operation Smile has very proudly joined forces for decades now with high school students, now with middle school students, with university students. They might not be doctors or nurses, but they have no ulterior motives. If they say, I want to help a kid, what they say is so much more pristine and beautiful and genuine than anything I might be able to say. So if they're telling us change starts with me, and we give them a platform to advocate, to make those changes, to spread the message, to educate, to engage, to actually say everyone can smile, and to actually empower them to continue to say, we won't stop until we heal, I think we're onto something. I think we're onto something. Last but not least, today we have the ability to correct the deformity. But I have to tell you, we don't have the ability to avoid it from happening. Ultimately, we would like to be out of a job. We would like to be able to say, we have to stop, we can't stop this from happening altogether. So how about the ability to generate that knowledge, to investigate, to research, and to come up with the ways to avoid a child from having to be born into this world with this disease, with this deformity. So we know that if in some parts of Asia, 1 in every 500 children is born this way. We know that in the United States, 1 in every 1,000 children is born this way. So it's interesting. If you take someone from Asia, from that population in Asia, and they move to the United States, a couple generations later, if they haven't mixed, the incidence goes from 1 in 500 to 1 in 1,000. So we know that there's something in the genetics that's interacting with the environment that's triggering the deformity, that's creating this thing from happening. But if we are able to avoid it from happening altogether, that will be something to truly celebrate. In a nutshell, whenever we see a kid in an empty operating room in some remote region of the world, we know today we can actually fill that with supplies and teams and people who are knowledgeable, who are kind-hearted, who actually want to make a change. But for that to happen, many more people have to actually engage. So when you actually decide to join us, to actually support us, whether it's with resources or time or your talents and your knowledge, you become the heroes. It might be true that in that operating room there's a doctor, a nurse, and a scrub nurse, an anesthesiologist, but you are truly the ones who are enabling that precious moment to happen. I'll stop with this story. A couple of years ago, I was in Paraguay, and I met Carlos. I went in the recovery room, and at the recovery room, I see Carlos with his baby, rocking his baby, and singing to her, and rocking her and singing to her. So much love. And as I'm filling out the medical record, I couldn't help but be moved by the moment, and I asked the nurse if she knew anything about it, and he said, well, Mom sort of left them because she couldn't deal with the fact that the baby had been born with a deformity. So he's been raising this child by himself. I walked to Carlos and I said, I hope you won't mind me saying this, but I've seen you. And I've seen the way you love your kid. And if at some point I get to be fortunate enough to be a dad, and I'm fortunate enough to love my child half as much as yours, as you love yours, I will consider myself a very, very fortunate man. So a few months ago, I gave a welcome to my little baby girl, Amelia. But the reason I share with you this picture is not only because of the joy that she brings to me, but because of that memory, of that commitment to be a good father, to be a loving father, to be a loving member of our communities and societies, but to actually do something about the ones who are less fortunate than I am. So on behalf of every single Operation Smile member around the world who would spend every ounce of energy, who will see beauty in every single one of these children, who would actually share with you the excitement that we feel every time we bring a kid out of the operating room and give it back to Mom, to you, the thinkers, the innovators, the dreamers, we ask you to join us, and we give thanks for everything you do.
Thank you. That's beautiful.
Thank you.
I think I'm going to just stand here and cry for a minute. We're going to do a little Q&A, and I already have a couple of questions that I want to. You have to stand up. I'm sitting
sure.
down. This is the way we treat our guests here. There you go. So, well, I don't know about you, but every time I hear this story, it's very touching. But you began at the very end to tell us a little bit about what causes this condition, and the answer is we actually don't know. Is that right?
Yeah. Well, in many diseases, you can actually identify the disease to a specific chromosome, even to a specific gene. With clefting, we have many different genes that are involved, and we're still actually discovering some potential genes that have some influence over the creation of this deformity. Now, this happens, if you think about it, this deformity happens anywhere from the 4th to the 12th week of gestation. So when the moms are the earliest parts of pregnancy, anything that might impact that beautiful process of cells coming together and organs being formed could potentially impact the process in itself and end up in a cleft. So we're still trying to figure out not only all the genes, but also the interactions between those genes and the environment.
So is there evidence, though, that it's genetic? Are there families, for example, that have a higher percentage of children born with this condition than other families do?
Correct. So
do you make a practice of, by the way, if you guys have questions, you should be thinking about them, and there are microphones on either side of the room, so you should take advantage of that. Are you taking DNA samples, for example, from parents and children and accumulating that over time? Because it seems to me our kinds of neural networks are pattern matching algorithms and other kinds of big data analysis might allow us to find correlations between the genetic information and the children that we discover with this condition.
Certainly. A few years ago, we actually started collecting DNA samples. Now, it's a lot easier because the samples now are just swabs or saliva that we take, so it's non-intrusive to children and families. But we understood that by explaining to them the opportunity that they were giving us to maybe stop this from happening altogether, that we felt like we could have their support, and we have gotten overwhelming support from the families. So we actually have the largest repository of DNA information in different populations in the world. And we've started to study it, and we continue collecting the samples because we believe that when we're able to actually finally target specific areas and the relationship in gene environment, we'll be able to start solving this problem.
You mentioned that you see different incidences of this condition in different parts of the world. So that suggests that you mentioned that environmental conditions, which might include viruses or bacteria as well as genetics, might have a role to play. It seems to me, we have a company, some of you will know, which is called Calico, the California Life Company. It notices that people get old, and it's trying to figure out how to stop that. And I'm interested in that for obvious reasons. Unfortunately, the engineers misinterpret that. It's sort of like, that's the fastest way to make sure nobody gets old. That's not the solution to the problem that we're looking for. But they're trying to look for genetic evidence from centenarians. What is it about the people who live to 100 years or more? What is it about their genetics that might correlate? So I just wonder if the tools that they're using might conceivably be applicable to this problem.
First of all, I was really interested in that product as well. But absolutely, yes. The same process of understanding how we are impacted by what's around us and the richness of information that we have within ourselves are impacted. It can be replicated in that way. So, now we know today that nutrition plays a role. We know that potential for medications play a role. We know that alcohol, tobacco, some drugs might play a role. But how do you explain that to a mom who's never had a...
Well, you can't. But think about Zika, which had such a dramatic effect on children, the microcephaly. Mm-hmm. We were able to discover that correlation very, very quickly, but I think it was because it was in Brazil that mm-hmm. the first incidents started to show up, and it was extremely intense. Mm-hmm. Large numbers in relative terms were happening all at the same time. And so the correlation was established there. Here we have what I guess is a more diffuse effect and much harder to discover. If you have questions, you should use the microphones, and if you don't, I'm going to keep going. So how long does it take to train a surgeon to perform this procedure? And the implication of one of the things you said is that it's not exactly the same procedure every time. It depends on the nature of the deformity, how you choose to resolve it. So this sounds like it's not a simple training program. How long and how hard is that?
So I must say the procedure of taking care of a child with a cleft lip, it's as short as 45 minutes. So in 45 minutes or less, you can actually transform the life of a kid. And the palate surgery takes about an hour to an hour and a half. But in the United States, for instance, the surgeons who take care of this problem would have trained 14 years after high school to be able to finally take care of this. But today, many of them are saying there ought to be ways to streamline this training so that it's not so long, so that more people in the world have access to the knowledge base and tools to take care of this deformity. But again, it gets to be a little bit more complex because there's such variety in techniques. But going back, what if we actually had the best technique? What if we were able to categorically say, if you do this cut here and this marking here and this flap here, you will have a really good result for the kids. Then you can shorten that amount of training.
Well, there certainly are a lot of, I'm not an expert in surgery, you are, but my impression is that there are surgical protocols that are fairly well defined for certain kinds of conditions. And so maybe there's a triage here where there are a set of situations that are solved fairly readily and obviously with a particular procedure, and then the others that are more complicated. We have a question right over there.
Yeah,
you want to say who you are and then...
Yeah, sure. Elias Pinto here, a Cloud CE here in New York. You kind of already touched a little bit on when I was going to go around training, but here's a question to you. So what do you think is the biggest challenge right now? Is it finding the people? Is it the logistics of getting the OR quality stuff down to those locations? Is it money? Is it just training? And then that's the segue from the last question. What do you think is the biggest thing preventing the next big push, the next big plateau? Does that make sense?
Yes.
Absolutely. Elias, that's a great question. First of all, I got to say thank you for being in the front of the room. So it's really all of the above. So we have the ability to actually put some resources into the problem, but how are we putting enough resources into them? But if you look at that as trying to solve the supply, let's say I put more doctors, we create more hospitals, we put together more operating rooms, that still doesn't solve the problem itself, because our children, their families, have all these barriers before they even get to us. So we put a great team to offer care in a very, very remote location, and sometimes they still have to travel 10, 12 hours to even get to us. And that 10 to 12-hour trajectory means that they have to invest whatever little money they might have. Some of them even borrow from the village to even get to us. So some of the barriers are related to money, some are geographical, some are just knowledge. People are saying, if you go, something bad will happen to you, or you shouldn't go because this is your punishment for something you did or your family has done. So there's this belief in some places that that's life and there's no solution for it, and you have to live through your punishment. So I guess what I'm saying is there's not a simple solution. There's not one thing I do will fix this problem today. But we do have to start looking at how we train people better so that more are there, how we are more equitable in the things that we do so that we don't forget about the poorest or the most marginalized or the ones who are most remote. It isn't only about the doctors and the nurses and the hospital. It's about truly understanding the people who are suffering from this deformity and all the things that are stopping them from getting to us. But I think there's an amazing opportunity, again, with a group of individuals and really smart and innovative as you to actually figure out some of those solutions. It matters a great deal to them, and I happen to believe that if we are fair, if we're honest, and then we'll actually be able to make a change in their lives, and in turn, they'll impact our lives in a positive way as well.
Can I ask a part B to that, if I may? So if I heard you correctly, then the biggest challenge to reaching the next plateau really happens way before they even show up, right? And I'm trying to think of ways that Google can help, whether it is empowering the government and spreading out that information. Now, it sounds to me, correct me if I'm wrong, or comment, it's that challenge of the ramp up to the person showing up, that solving that set of problems is what?
That's one that's important, and that's maybe why I showed that map, because a lot of places in the world, a lot of countries do not even know this is a significant problem. There is not a registry. So until we go there and we say, we'd like to do this, they don't realize that hundreds of kids or people are having to deal with this. And all of a sudden, what if we were able to actually map the areas where these kids are so we can actually do follow-up? If we know that they're really far, how do we help them get to us? If we understand from the ones who come to us that they're having other issues in terms of knowledge and beliefs, how do we address those as well? But it it all takes an enormous amount of resources and talent and commitment to actually make it happen, but we can make it happen.
So, yes, we have a question over here.
Thank you for coming, Dr. Ruben.
a
I
pleasure.
have a question from one of my personal experiences, not mine, but my cousin's. My cousin is younger to me, and he just married yesterday, actually, Feb 5th, I think it was. Yeah, yesterday. And he had a cleft from the very beginning. When I believe they tried a surgery when he was 7 or 8 years old. That was the first shot. He fixed a little bit, but then he went again. I was definitely understandably naive. Had an excuse. I was the younger one, but I think the entire family didn't really know what was going on because of the grades and the school performance. Nobody knew that. Everybody thought like it's just how the brain is, just the child is. Well, now he's married. He's an engineer, but it took him a lot of effort to get where he was after multiple surgeries. And I guess that was a couple of decades ago. So I'm sure things have advanced a bit. But what are the success scenarios? This is when I looked at that, I thought like, wow, that's amazing. That I haven't seen in practice. In my knowledge, like looking at my whatever sample set I have seen. And that was also in India, so where there could be not at the top of the line surgical surgery procedures applicable in that area as much as here. My question was more like, if you would know, there wasn't Google there then either, like I could just Google and put the picture and search, hey, what is this? So how would things would have been different if he would be 20 years younger, and if we were born now rather than then?
That's a great question. First of all, congratulations. That's amazing that he just got married, and that's exactly the type of story you want to tell, because kids who are born this way should have the opportunity to live a full and happy life. So that's fantastic. But I imagine that you're talking about a couple of decades ago in India, that your family actually had to go through the hardship of having to figure out how to offer care. Now, you mentioned he was operated at the age of 6. What if I were to tell you that today, Operation Smile Operates takes care of these kids from 3 months and above. In the United States, in a few weeks after birth, the kids are being taken care of. So we do 3 to 6 months, start the surgical process out of maintaining a level of safety, because it's obviously surgery, so we want to make sure the kid is strong enough. But the younger you take care of them, the scarring is probably least likely to actually be noticed. In an ideal scenario, this is the outcome that you want. A child who looks beautiful and you can barely tell. But sometimes, as in surgery, the outcome might not be the best one. So it might be a little short, so you have to go on and redo the surgery. And that's, again, why it's so important to understand who are the surgeons that are getting these beautiful outcomes and learn from those surgeons consistently and throughout. Now, so the rate of success, to actually be able to take care of a kid, 45 minutes, it's doable. The rate of success in the hands of experts is really, really very high. And that's why it's so important to train. But your story is one of hope, because he was able to grow even through the hardship of getting treatment later. But you pose a question, what if he had been born today? It would have been easy to find out, or get a picture and find out where he could go to actually receive treatment. That would have been really nice, right? So information gives you choices. But what about places in the world, but there's still no information? There are places in the world where you still don't have access. So hopefully at some point soon,
yes.
we'll anywhere in the world, a family might have access to through a mobile unit. I mean, sometimes in countries where you don't have a computer, where you have a little phone, it's actually pretty pervasive. It used to be that wasn't the case. But what if every single family in any village in the world, in any small little town, could actually find out that, oh, my child was born this way, but I can get care. So it would be a different story, right? So he wouldn't have had to wait until 6 years old. But today, if we actually make this possible, then maybe children shouldn't wait more than a few months to actually get this taken care of.
So this raises a very interesting possibility. We've been doing work on facial modeling, for example, which you alluded to in your talk. in order to try to understand what would happen if we performed surgery on this child, what might the outcome look like. And that's helpful for the family to understand. But I can imagine having a family that takes a photo with their mobile phone, and instead of saying, find me more pictures like this, which is one of the features that we have, it would be, what can I do about this? You know, show me places that can treat this visible situation. That sounds almost doable. It sounds like we could find a way to take a picture like that, do a search that would turn up Operation Smile, for example. So we ought to think about that.
Yeah, and it goes back to Eliza's original question of, you know, what else can we do that we have the ability to do?
The other thing, the point about people getting online, we're only 50% penetrated globally. So when I was talking to Eric Schmidt the other day, he informed me that I wasn't allowed to retire because we're only 50% done. I have another 3.5 billion people to get online. So much for any retirement plans I might have. I'm wondering about the facilities that you need in order to do the surgery. I mean, this isn't exactly like a field hospital thing, but I mean, what kinds of conditions are adequate in order to do this sort of surgery?
That's a good question because, again, when you take a kid from the arms of a mom or a dad, you want to make sure that you give that kid back. It's a huge, almost sacred responsibility, if you will. So where can you take care of these kids in a way that is safe and offers high quality? So Operation Smile has been able to perfect a model through standards that were created with experts from around the world to make sure that the right anesthesia machines, the right oxygen supply, the right anesthetic gases, et cetera, are available. So we can actually go to a very remote hospital and just ask for the operating room, the OR lights, and the oxygen, and we bring actually everything else that's required for that kid to get that very, very safe surgery at that time. And we're very proud of that. But what we want to do is go beyond that. I mean, it shouldn't be an episodic thing, or even in the and we have centers that are standalone centers that work year-round. But if I go to a very remote town and I leave, I might have taken care of X amount of kids, but I have to figure out a way to continue to help that town. So our co-founder always says, you know, kids actually, with cleft lips and palates actually give us a chance to learn through them about the needs of their communities. So we've started to actually get more engaged in areas related to the safety of surgery, so that a lot of places that are very remote start to get access to the proper anesthesia machines, instruments, supplies, so that not only their kids, but the family members can actually get surgery. And if we do help the system of health of a country, then it's less likely that the need will be so overwhelming. And then we can actually work together with either those governments or the community. You know, a lot of people put the responsibility on governments and say, you have to take care of this. But health, which is a right, is a responsibility that all of us share. So everybody in the community can actually do something to create units like the ones that we create in very remote areas and to make them be there for the long haul.
What happens post-op? I mean, you worry about things like infection and everything else. Right. So how long do you need to keep the children in the hospital or somewhere where you can be, avoid disease and infections and things like that?
So it's actually quite simple. When you take care of a kid with a cleft lip or a palate, they can actually go home by the next day.
That's amazing.
I mean, obviously, we have to make sure that there's proper coverage, antibiotics, they have proper medications, but we actually see them at the very least 3 to 7 days after surgery to make sure that everything is okay. But you pose a question that is a big puzzle for us. So we want to see the kid 6 months later, 3 months later, 9 months later. But if the kid has traveled 12 hours on a boat, on a donkey, on a horse, on whatever, how do you make sure that you're able to see that kid again and you're at ease that the kid's so great?
Let's hope that the mobile phones and the cameras and everything else is sort of remote diagnosis, remote health care. Has a small role to play there.
Correct. Well, and today what we do is we still send teams out to actually make sure that the kids are great, but every single one of these actions requires time and resources. If we are able to use tools that enable us to be more efficient and still offer really high quality care, then we can actually reinvest those resources into taking care of more and more kids and train more and more people.
You know, you would almost imagine that you've seen these photographs, it's dramatic. You would think that because of the dramatic positive outcome, this would stimulate interest in creating hospital facilities in those remote villages, having seen what medicine can do in this one very dramatic case. And so that might stimulate provision of better health care. It's certainly a message to deliver to countries that are struggling with the health of their population. Let me just round this up, unless there are other questions from others here, and ask you once again to tell us a little bit more about the opportunities that we have as individuals and maybe as a corporation to contribute to Operation Smile and its success. You mentioned quite a long list of things that could be done. Is there a place on the website that says, here are the things that we need people to do or to contribute or to take action about? Would we find that on the website?
Surely. So in the website is mainly an awareness and opportunity tool, and that allows people to get educated and understand if this is a problem that can be fixed, and allows us to gather the resources. But this goes back to, again, the same question that Elias was asking. It's like, how can we help? Which is a beautiful question to ask. So certainly resources, and Google is very, very generous when employees or staff or team members give of their own resources, Google matches it. And that's one way to give. But there's more ways to engage. And if you think about it, and I mentioned this, in an operating room, you have a doctor, a nurse, and an anesthesiologist. Before that moment happens, a lot of people have had to actually make a decision that that problem is their problem. Our co-founders usually says, you know, love is a decision to make someone else's problem your problem. So when we look at not only giving resources, what do you have? Time is important. So there are ways of volunteering. You know, we not only have doctors and nurses who actually help us. We have many non-medical volunteers who
So if somebody from Google volunteered, what would happen?
They could help us with medical records. They could help us manage the environment where families feel very comfortable, interact with them. Listen, we have the ability to not only offer care, but actually transform a hospital that might be like a very, very dark place into a place of hope. And that is not something the doctors usually do. And so when we see a kid that comes in an operating room and they just grab our hands and follow us, we know that many volunteers have actually made that kid and the parents feel welcome, feel cared for, feel appreciated with dignity. And that's what a lot of our non-medical volunteers are able to do with us. And listen, certainly I've outlined a series of potential opportunities for solutions to problems that are complex in the way we look at them today, because my brain doesn't work the way yours does, or our friends here do. But I am sure that someone here or someone connected here is already thinking about, how do I make sure that people figure this out better? How do we make sure that we can actually fix this problem? How do we make sure that we actually avoid this from happening? What knowledge do I bring as an innovator that can tell great people, hey, you've been doing a good job, but we can make it better. We can do it better.
So thank you so much, Ruben, for telling us this story. It's all about human dignity and its restoration, and that's something we could all wish for. So I hope that everybody who's out there listening and maybe watching this video later will take the opportunity to help Operation Smile create some more smiles all around the world.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody. Appreciate it. Thank you.